ॐ भूर्भुवः स्वः तत्सवितुर्वरेण्यं भर्गो देवस्य धीमहि धियो यो नः प्रचोदयात् ॐ शान्ति शान्ति शान्तिः. Sai Ram, sisters and brothers, I am starting my 11th video on Sai Gita. I start. Embodiments of love. Arjuna had achieved great strength of renunciation at the time when he surrendered himself and was ready to receive the Gita teachings. At that point, he had detached himself from the world and attached himself firmly to the transcendent principle manifested before him in the form of Lord Krishna. Such detachment from the world and its objects and attachment to the divine principle, which is your true essence, must become your goal also. This is the destiny of every human being in the course of your spiritual evolution. You will, as will every other individual in time, develop renunciation and dispassion towards the objects of the senses and at the same time develop an intense aspiration to realize the Atma within. Sense control, the foundation for self knowledge. If you were to construct a house, even a simple and ordinary one, would not you take great care to lay a proper foundation? If that is true for a little house, then how much more care must you take in laying down a solid foundation for the great treasure house of self knowledge? It is to provide such a foundation that Krishna, in his teachings to Arjuna in the Gita, emphasized the need to control the senses by developing a strong detachment from the objects of the world. This is an essential requirement for building up a solid foundation. If the foundation is not strong, the mansion of such self knowledge will not last long, it will soon collapse. Renunciation does not spring up suddenly to become the foundation of self knowledge. Such a strong detachment does not just happen on the spur of the moment. This quality must be steadily developed and practiced together with devotion and sense control. If you want to light a lamp, you will need oil, a container to hold it, and a wick. In the same way, in order to light the lamp of wisdom, there is a need for detachment, devotion, and control of the senses. Detachment can be thought of as the container and devotion, the oil. Sense control may be compared to the wick. If you bring these three elements together, the Lord Himself will come and light the lamp of self knowledge inside you. Before lighting this lamp in the heart of Arjuna, Krishna told him that he first had to establish complete control over his senses. Such a strict control over the senses is not something which can be achieved by most people. Even if they were to make an effort in this direction and achieve some measure of sense control, ordinary people would not continue with these efforts because they would be convinced that by giving up sense enjoyments, their very life would come to an end. They consider sense enjoyments as the only true source of happiness. This is what they experience day after day. But the unbounded joy of self knowledge is something they have not experienced ever once, even once. When you have a bird in your hand, would you let go of it and try to catch the two birds which may or may not be hiding in the bush? Reasoning in this way, they consider it madness to give up the sensory enjoyments which they enjoy every day in order to gain the bliss of the Atma. through self-knowledge and experience which they have never known. Sense enjoyment is an illusory joy. It is for these reasons that you will find many people criticizing the doctrine of detachment and control of the senses which is taught in the Gita. They say it is not really useful and applicable for ordinary people in their daily lives, but this criticism arises because they are ignorant of the real process that is taking place. All the momentary pleasures which they enjoy are just reflections of the true joy that always exists in the heart. By thinking again and again of a particular person or object, the mind departs from its own resting place and goes out to that person or object and takes on its form. Then it deludes itself into thinking that it is enjoying that object. But this can never be real joy. It is only a limited kind of joy which is imagined in the mind, a reflection of the true inner joy which is the source of all joys. To make this clear, consider an example. A small baby may be sucking its thumb and drinking its saliva. It gets delight from this because it thinks that it is getting milk out of its thumb. But the fact is that the saliva which the baby thinks is milk is coming from its own mouth, not from its thumb. It deludes itself into thinking that the source of its joy originated from outside its mouth. Consider another example. A dog has found a hard bone. Once he has this bone, it becomes very dear to him and he does not want to share it with any other dog. So he takes it to some solitary place. There he looks at it, admires it, and starts gnawing on it. Since it is an old bone, it is very hard with all his enthusiasm and strength. He goes on biting until he dislodges a tooth from his gums. Some blood spills out and oozes onto the bone. The dog is convinced that the blood has come out of that bone and he immensely enjoys the taste of it. But the blood has not come out of the bone, it has come out of his own mouth. The dog does not realize the truth. Just as in the case of the baby, he has become deluded by following the imagination of his own mind. All joy comes only from the self. In a similar way, the ignorant think that they are getting joy out of the sense objects, but this limited joy that they experience does not come from outside of themselves. Ever ever present within their own heart is true joy. It is this unchanging inner joy that gets superimposed on an object, making that object appear as if it is the source of joy. In this way, they believe they are deriving joy from the things of the world, but their joy is merely a small reflection of the unlimited joy that is hidden within them. Once they delude themselves into thinking that the joys and pleasures which they have in the outer world are true experiences and the joy which they might get from the inner world is only an illusion, they lose all interest in practicing detachment. Then they give up pursuing the transcendental joy and continue pursue only the worldly enjoyments which they believe can be obtained from sense objects. If an object really gave joy, then everyone would experience that joy to the same extent. If the joy were really inherent in the object itself, then the joy derived from that object should be the same for all people. Yet we know that this is not the case. If a particular object gives joy and pleasure to some people, the same object may be repulsive to other people, giving displeasure to them. For instance, some people may greatly enjoy cucumbers, whereas others may not like them at all. If joy were an integral part of cucumbers, then there would be the one experience for all. Cucumbers would not give a feeling of joy to some and a feeling of dislike to others. Why is there this difference in reaction between different people? Why are there things which you may like that are disliked by others? It must mean that the joy you experienced was not directly associated with the object, but that this joy came from within. The feeling that you experienced was but a reflection of your own inexhaustible inner source of joy. Sense objects can only give temporary joy. These likes and dislikes that you now feel are just temporary phenomena. They are not permanent. Consider for a moment that at some time you felt very hungry. Now suppose that you were served some food which you found very tasty. What made this food so delicious? If you examine this question carefully, you would conclude that it was your hunger that made everything taste so good. As long as you were hungry, you found the meal that had been served to you to be most delectable. But after your hunger was satisfied, even if the most sumptuous delicacies were placed in front of you, they would not have appealed to you. When you are hungry, ordinary food will taste quite good, giving you great joy. But once your hunger is satisfied, even the most delicious food is not at all tasty to you. The only way that you can understand this change is that all these likes and dislikes emanate directly from you, the individual. They do not come from the objects as such. All your feelings of joy and sorrow emanate from the inner being, not from the external objects. Ordinary people think that the joy or pain which they get from being with people whom they like or dislike comes from those people, but it is not so. It is one's own likes and dislikes which are responsible for one's joys and sorrows. It may be observed that when people have a strong liking for others, holding them very dear, then whatever be the attitude or the actions of that person, they will still like them all the same. What is the reason for this unshakable fidelity, this affectionate regard one may have for another person despite a number of unsavory things which that person may be saying or doing? The reason is that when you like someone, the things which that person says and does will appear sweet to you. When you consider a person as very dear to you, then you feel that you love that person very much. This quality which you call love is really a feeling of attachment in you that you are directing towards the other individual. In such an attachment, both the love and the joy which appear to be present originate only from you, whether or not the other person has similar feelings. The feelings which you actually experience come from within you only. They are not a part of the other person at all. A similar thing was told by a great sage to his wife in the ancient scriptures. The sage said to his wife, "Dear one, you do not love me for my sake, but for your own sake. Everything you love and hold dear, you love only for the sake of the Atma. Your highest self, the Atma, is the dearest of all, and it is for its sake that someone is dear to you. These feelings you have for others are all just manifestations of that great love you feel for your own true self. Body consciousness tends the pure love of the self. In the whole world, each person, whoever he may be, will love another only for his own sake, not for the sake of the other. If he loves an object, he loves it for the self alone and not for the sake of that object. That self is the Atma, the true self. But when the pure love of the Atma becomes tainted with body consciousness and the senses hold sway, attachment and selfishness arise. This inevitably leads to sorrow. The body is impermanent, death is certain for all. Even if someone were to live for 100 years, he would still have to face death one day. Everyone knows that, but for is not strange that he would be dying or crying and feeling sorry for those who have already died. Everyone is sure to meet death, and so everyone may be thought of as among the dying. Yet, even though they themselves are dying, people feel sorrow and grief when thinking of someone who has died. It is as if death were a totally unusual and unexpected thing rather than the natural conclusion that must come to all. This sorrow that comes on, particularly when someone near and dear has died, can only be there because of attachment. After knowing full well that death is certain, if you still worry about somebody, it must be due to the attachment which you have developed for that body. It is this attachment which is responsible for all your grief. Therefore, when someone has died, the primary cause for sorrow is attachment, not love. Basically, every human being at all times is a seeker of joy. He thirsts for joy and does not ever want sorrow. Man always aspires for profit, never for loss. That is his very nature. Profit, joy, and bliss are inherent in his makeup. They are at the very core of his being. Every man, right from the beginning, would like to have only gain, not pain. For a businessman, the first thing he thinks of is his profit. Here in India, when measuring out some staples such as rice, if the number of kgs goes above 6, then the shopkeeper will not say 7 but 6 plus 1. This is because the word for 7 always means weeping. The shopkeeper will use another word to avoid uttering this unhappy word. In this way, man never wants to face unhappiness and loss. He wants only profit and gain and the happiness they bring. Self knowledge gives the greatest joy. Of all the possible profits and gain, the supreme profit of all, which gives the greatest joy, is self knowledge, the knowledge of the Atma. That is the joy you must seek and make your own. Consider a beautiful rose. The moment you look at a rose, joy emanates from your heart. Similarly, when you see a handsome person or any beautiful thing in this world, you instantly feel joy. Many people undertake trips to go sightseeing. Why, why do they go? In order to derive joy from it. Therefore, you can see beauty in nature and you can see beauty in people and you can derive great joy from all the beauty that you see. But how long does this kind of joy and beauty last? The rose that you picked today starts to dry out tomorrow. Then its beauty gets lost. The moment the beauty fades away, the joy that you previously derived from it also subsides. It is the same with the different stages of life: childhood, youth, adulthood, and old age. Childhood may be said to reflect divinity. During early childhood, the individual does not suffer much from hatred, jealousy, anger, and so forth. Jesus said that since children do not have any really bad qualities, they could be considered divine. During that period of life, there are no bad thoughts or bad traits, either in the mind or in the body. Little children are beautiful because they do not have impure feelings arising out of impure thoughts. As they grow up, they gradually develop tainted qualities. The moment such negative qualities grow, the beauty of the small child fades away. Therefore, it is the coming in of impure thoughts which lead to impure words and impure deeds, which then result in the child losing its beauty. Beauty and joy. We see that the beauty possessed by a person is transient. It gradually fades away and therefore it cannot give permanent joy. Even a newborn donkey is very beautiful, but gradually as it grows, it develops a big stomach, gets a splotchy coat and becomes ugly to look at. As long as there are no negative qualities, everything looks beautiful. But whoever the person or whatever be the science object, you will find that its beauty is limited and therefore the joy derivable from it is limited. Joy and beauty always go together. What is the one principle which has permanent joy and permanent beauty? Within itself, it is the Atma. It never changes. It has no modification. In fact, it has no form at all. Beauty and joy are its form. Although joy naturally emanates from the core of your heart, You think that you are deriving joy from the sense objects and the sensory organs, but this is not so. All joy comes from within you, and you have deluded yourself into thinking that it comes from something outside. The scriptures speak of the ethereal joy that emanates from the heavenly world of the Creator. The joy which can be experienced through the contact of the senses with the sense objects is extremely small when compared to that creative joy. The sensory joy may be described as a drop in the ocean of bliss that is the creator joy, but even this vast ocean of joy experienced by the creator of the universe is itself as small as an atom when compared with the boundless joy that radiates from within your spiritual heart. That is the primary source of all joy. It is the joy of joy. The heart can be compared to a most splendorous and effulgent light which shines everywhere. Try to understand this brilliant spiritual light which is ever luminous and all pervading and is your inner truth. The light of Atma illuminates everything. During the day, the sun illuminates the various objects of the world. At night, the moon plays a similar, though lesser role. Therefore, you can declare that it is the sun and the moon that are responsible for the luminous nature of the world and its objects. But during the dream state, you also see various things. Where are the sun and the moon in that state? The sun that you see in the daytime during your waking state is not there in the dream state, nor is the moon there, nor is any other source of light visible there to illuminate the various objects that you can see an entire world, namely the world of the dream. What is that? What is that illuminates that world? In the deep sleep state, there is absolute darkness. There is neither knowledge nor wisdom in that state, but how do you know that it is dark? What is that enables you to apprehend this darkness? The deep sleep state has been described as the unconscious state. The dream state has been described as the subconscious state. The waking state has been described as the conscious state. There is a fourth state which transcends all these other states. It may be described as the superconscious state. In the superconscious state, you are able to see everything, everywhere, and enjoy bliss supreme. What is the light that illuminates this bliss state and permits you to experience this unmitigated joy? That light is the effulgence that emanates from the Atma. It is this light which illuminates all the other states as well as enables you to see them. In the way the sages have spoken of the superconscious state, they declared we are able to see a state which transcends the others, including the darkness of the dreamless state. Beyond the dreamless state, it is the supreme light of the Atma which illuminates the waking, the dream, and the deep sleep states. To understand this a little better, consider an example from the waking state. When you close your eyes for a minute, what exactly are you seeing? You will say that there is nothing there, only absolute darkness. But then the question arises, how is it that I am able to perceive this darkness? Since I see it and am able to describe it, there must be a light of consciousness which illuminates this state and enables me to see even this darkness. That light is the light of Atma. It is only through this transcendental light that all the other lights can shine. We celebrate a festival of light in which we light a candle and from that one candle go on lighting all the other candles and lamps. This first light is the basis for lighting the other. It is because we have this first light that we are able to light so many others. For living things, this first light is the divine light of one Atma. With it, all the individual lamps representing the countless individual beings are lit in turn. It is because of this divine light that the eyes are able to see. It shines from inside and illuminates all the beings. But it is not only the source of all living beings, it is also the source of all objects and all the external bodies of light, such as the sun and the moon. You may wonder, since you cannot see this divine light, how can you be sure that it illuminates all these other objects and lights? Here, the example of a battery will be instructive. You cannot see the electrical power which is in the cells, but if you switch on the current flow, you can see the light in the bulb. If there has been no electric power in the cell, you would not have been able to get any light from the bulb. The body may be thought of as an electric lamp designed by this battery cell, which is the mind. Your eyes are the bulb and your intelligence is the switch which controls it. In this battery cell of mind, a very special type of energy derived from the Atma is stored. In ordinary electric batteries, the power gets exhausted very quickly, but the Atmic current flows continuously through the mind. The Vedas have declared that the mind is the receptacle for storing the Atmic energy. It is this inexhaustible source that provides the temporary flow pleasure when some pleasing object is perceived. The joy of the self is the only true joy. All the joys and pleasures which you enjoy in this world are only temporary and are just the reflections of the immeasurable joy which is inside of you. Out of the ignorance, you believe that your joy comes from sense objects, and then this momentary joy is true. But only what is permanent is true. These temporary joys which are associated with the things of the world are not the true joy. Only the eternal bliss, that is the Atma, is true. These others come and go. All the things that you see in the waking state disappear in the dream state. All the joys and sorrows which you experience during the dream state, you leave behind the dream state. When you come back into the waking state, people and objects that you see in the waking state will appear as changing reflections in the dream state, and then they get completely absorbed and disappear in the deep sleep state. In this way, your joy changes as these states change. All the worldly joys which you think to be so permanent will give you a great deal of trouble in the end and lead you to grief. Therefore, Krishna told Arjuna, pay attention only to your inner truth, the basis from which springs all manifestations. Then outer appearances and sense impressions will not bother you. The basis does not change, whereas the manifestations which depend on that basis continuously change. If the basis were changing along with manifestation, it would be impossible for you to even live. Consider this small example. At various times, you may have used different types of vehicles, such as cars, trains, or buses, to travel from one place to another. The car might be moving fairly fast, so might the bus, and even if you are just walking, you must be going quite fast. In each case, this movement will be in relation to road which remains steady and unchanging. Suppose along with the moving car or the moving bus, the road itself is also moving rapidly as in violent earthquake, then what would happen? You would certainly be moving, but you could end up in any direction. You are not like reach your goal despite great efforts and hardships along the way. In order to reach your goal, the road must be steady. It is because of the Atmic source, the indweller of every heart is permanent and steady, that people are able to enjoy the things of the world, which are permanent and changing. But Krishna warned Arjuna, do not be satisfied with these furtive pleasures which are mistakenly believed come from the world. The world is fleeting, it is fickle and full of sorrow. It is the ever changing outer manifestation. It is not the permanent basis. It cannot lead you to your truth. How can you count on the world for your sport when it is undergoing so many changes and modifications? Would, would it be possible for you to derive permanent bliss from it? Let go of the world and turn towards the transcendental principle. Turn towards the Atma. It is forever steady and unchanging. There you will find the unending joy that you have been seeking futi- futilely outside in the world. Do not drive with your foot on the brake. Now, some of you may be thinking that if your young children are taught sense control, they would turn into inert, helpless human beings. But nobody is telling them that they should not make use of their senses. It is only that they should learn to control them properly. There are brakes in a car, and whenever there is danger, you use the brakes to stop the car. When Swami is asking you to control the senses and to control the mind, some of you might be wondering if you would be able to live at all and carry on your routine functions. Swami is not asking you to drive with your foot on the brake, but to use the brakes when necessary to control the car. Whenever there is some danger, it is when there is some danger such as impure thoughts, impure feelings, impure sights, impure hearing, and so on, that you have to exercise control. If you do not have any brakes at all, you will surely come to grief. A bullock which cannot be brought under control, a horse without reins, a car without brakes, a person without sense control are all extremely dangerous and heading for disaster. Therefore, Arjuna, Krishna said, control your senses and your mind and recognize the defects that are inherent in all the objects of the world. When you turn from the changing manifestations and establish yourself in the unchanging basis, then you will be able to live happily anywhere because you will be established in the source of all happiness, the Atma, which is eternal bliss. The wisdom teachings do not admonish you to give up your family or give up your worldly duties. Be in the world, use your senses, but do so in a proper and ethical way, appropriate to each time and circumstance. Never forgetting your true purpose. The Gita teaches the importance of discipline, of observing limits in all your activities. The brakes are used in a car for the welfare and protection of the passengers so that they can safely reach their goal. In the same way, the senses must be brought under control and used for the welfare and protection of the individual so that it can complete its journey safely. That is why Krishna was so insistent that Arjuna develop sense control. Detachment, devotion, and sense control. This sense control is something like the wick in the lamp of your heart. Merely having the wick of sense control is not enough. You must have oil, which is the fuel for the lamp, that is your devotion, and there must be a container which holds the oil, and that is your detachment. If you have the container, the oil, and wick, you will be able to light the lamp easily. Still, someone has to come and light it. That someone is God. Once you have detachment, devotion, and sense control, then the divine will come and light that lamp in your heart. In the case of Arjuna, it was Krishna who performed the sacred act of lighting the lamp and revealing the splendor of Atma in Arjuna's heart. Suppose you have some flowers, a needle, and some thread. Will these automatically turn into a garland? No, there has to be someone to string the garland together. You may have gold and precious stones, but without a goldsmith to create it, you will not be able to obtain a beautiful jewel made out of these articles. You may have a high intelligence, you may have books containing the highest knowledge, and you may have keen eyes to see them, but without someone to teach you to read, they will be all meaningless and useless to you. The Atma is always present, it never changes, it never comes and goes. The spiritual teachings will also be ever present, they will be there waiting for you when you are ready to receive them. And inwardly, you may have an intense yearning for illumination. All these may be there for you, but unless the true Guru, the spiritual teacher, comes and transmits the immortal knowledge to you, you cannot become enlightened if you are ready to realize the underlying reality of all the objects of the world and to discover the divine principle within you. Then you need the true teacher, the highest source of knowledge, to come and instruct you. To gain the sacred knowledge of the self, the teacher is universal teacher. It is God Himself who comes to guide you to your goal. He may take on different forms. In the case of Arjuna, the divine teacher was Krishna the avatar, of that age, and he started by teaching Arjuna sense control. You must take some time to reflect on the deeper significance of all these teachings on sense control, which were given by Krishna to Arjuna, not in an ashram setting, but on the battlefield at the eve of a great battle fought to preserve righteousness and to counter the forces of injustice and untruth that had become rampant. Worldly knowledge is useless without self knowledge. Krishna taught in the Gita that once you acquire true spiritual knowledge, your troubles, difficulties, and sorrows all disappear. Embodiments of love. As as long as you identify yourself with your body, you will be exposed to countless problems and sorrows. The primary reason for having obtained your body in the first place is to enable you to undergo the consequences of your past actions. This is your karma, the results of activities you have engaged in which have not yet fructified. Why did you accumulate this karma in the first place? Why did you engage in activities which bear consequences long into the future? The reason for karma is the desire or attachment you have for some things and the dislike or repulsion you have for other things. And what is the reason for this attraction and repulsion? It is because your mind is steeped in duality. You believe that this world is real and is filled with objects and things which are separate from you. But where did this false view, this duality come from? The reason for duality is your state of ignorance, the beclouding of your consciousness by a dark veil that covers the knowledge of your true reality. The light of wisdom dispels the darkness of ignorance. You have forgotten the fundamental unity of all beings. You have become unmindful of the divine basis of all things. You have lost sight of the Atma, your real self. It is because of this ignorance that you experience so much grief and sorrow. If you want to be free of this darkness of ignorance, you have to obtain the light of wisdom. The only thing that you can remove darkness is light. Similarly, the only thing that can remove ignorance is wisdom or spiritual knowledge. Ignorance has covered the knowledge of divinity, and you are not able to perceive the truth. Just as the embers of a fire are covered by ashes, your light of truth has been covered by the ashes of ignorance, and therefore you have not been aware of your own reality. You may have the power of sight in your eyes, but if there is a cataract covering the surface of your eyes, you will not be able to see. It is only after an operation is performed that you will be able to get your sight back. Similarly, it is only after a spiritual operation is performed and the cloud of ignorance is removed that the sun of wisdom will shine freely. It is just like the sun rays beaming into a room. The moment you pull back the heavy drapes covering the window. The principle of divinity exists in everyone, so it is impossible for any person to be completely devoid of wisdom. There is no doubt whatsoever that in time the clouds of ignorance will be dispelled for all of humanity, and full light of wisdom will shine forth. All will realize their divine state. When human life is infinitely expanded, it becomes the only one divine principle. Man plus infinity is divinity. When the human mind is expanded to infinity, it becomes the divine mind. It becomes the creative principle which brought forth this universe. The Atma, the self in man, and the divinity that dwells within him are one and the same. Add if infinity onto yourself and you become the divinity itself. You will have merged into the Atma. Unfortunately, having become embodied, you have forgotten your divinity, your unlimited infinity. You are aware only of your limited individuality. If you want to attain your infinity reality, you must make an inquiry into the divinity which is inherent within you. Atma remains unchanged, the individual changes. Consider a person who has built a house for himself. From the moment he completed the house, he has been considering it as his house. When he dies, the house goes to his heir, who then starts calling it his house. Suppose as time goes on, this new house owner becomes poor and has to sell the house to discharge his debts. Another person buys the house owner, the house goes to his suppose as time goes on, this new house owner becomes poor and has to sell the house to discharge his debts. Another person buys the house and begins calling the same house his house. Now, who does this house really belong to? Does it belong to the one who constructed it, to the one who inherited it, or to the one who bought it? There is no change in the house. In other words, the object remains as before. There is a change only in the persons who claim to own it. The house just continues to be there, but the claimed ownership undergoes repeated changes. In a similar way, there is the unchanging entity, the Atma, which, like the house, remains unaffected by the countless owners who come and go. Each one claims personal ownership of this inner house, which they call I. Each one believes that I to be their own personal self, but in truth, it is the one unchanging Atma, and so this myness goes on constantly changing, but the Atma, which is being claimed as one's personal property, expressed every time one says I, remains affected by all these assertions. Is there any medicine to cure this disease of I-ness or myness? Both the revealed and the written scriptures have declared that it is the mind which is responsible for this possessive nature. It has been said that along with the five senses of perception, the mind may be considered to be a sixth sense, but it is not another sense equal to the other sense. In fact, it is the master of all the senses. The two states of the mind, pure and impure. If there were no mind, neither the motor organs nor the sensory organs would be able to function at all. For all these various senses, the mind is in the position of the controller. It acts as the bridge to the inner life of the person. You may be in a lecture hall and your eyes and ears may be taking in all that is happening, but if your mind is not there, if it were to wander off to your hometown to think over some events going on there, you would not register anything which was taking place in the hall. Afterwards, you might question your neighbor. What did the lecturer say? My mind was not here. What is the reason for your not hearing although your ears are there? What is the reason for your not seeing although your eyes are there? The reason is the mind. If your mind is absent, even if your eyes are there, here you will not be aware of who your neighbor is. Even if your ears are here and will not be aware of what is being said, the inner significance of this is that mind is the master of all the senses. All the senses should properly be subservient to the mind. When the mind is in a position of stillness, the senses will not be able to function at all. The mind has two states. One is the impure mind, which is the thinking faculty, and the second is the pure mind, which is the seat of deepest feelings, experienced as the spiritual heart. When the mind allows itself to be subservient to the senses, it is impure. But when the mind exercises control over the senses and follows the dictates of its highest inner knowing, it is pure. In other words, when the lower mind follows the buddhi, the higher mind which knows the dictates of the heart, it is pure. Impure and pure are just aspects of the same mind. In its natural state, the mind is pure. Through the thinking process and its association with the senses, the mind becomes impure. Consider a small example. The nature of a handkerchief is pure whiteness. The white color is natural to it. When you use the handkerchief, it acquires dirt and then you describe it as being dirty. After the washerman cleans it, you again think of it as a clean cloth. The dirty cloth and the clean cloth are one and the same cloth. Having acquired some dirt has become dirty cloth. Once the cloth has been washed and the dirt has been removed, it has become pure and you call it a clean cloth. You say that the washerman has made the cloth white, but really he has not made it white. Whiteness is its natural state. He has only removed the dirt. Similarly, when the mind absorbs impurities from the senses, it can be described as an impure mind. But when the senses impressions have been removed and the mind is no longer turned towards the senses, it becomes pure again. It is in this context that you can understand the meaning of these two states of the mind, pure and impure. When the mind is intimately associated with the senses, it is impure. Then it is nothing but a bundle of thoughts. It can be conceived of as the process of thinking itself. In this process of thinking revolving around duality and its polarities of attraction and repulsion, the mind gets dirty. It absorbs the impure impressions of the sense organs and becomes impure. All this at this point, it does not have any specific form. It is merely the thing which thinks. Give the mind some peace, turn it towards God. When the lower mind is free from the dirt and impurities of the senses and is turned towards the higher mind, it again becomes pure. Higher mind is always aware of the inherent divinity. When you turn your mind to the divinity, you will be able to free it from all the trouble and sorrows associated with the impure thoughts which arise from the impressions of the sense organs. Therefore, you have to make every effort to turn your mind away from the senses and towards the God. This can be described as meditation or yoga. Union with God. This is the process whereby you cleanse your mind which has become impure and again make it pure. The mind needs a certain amount of peace. Just as the body needs rest, the mind needs peace. How can the mind get peace? It is only when you can control the thinking process and slow the flow of thoughts that the mind gains some peace. The mind will always try to go out through the sense organs towards various sense objects. This then gives rise to the thinking process. If you control this tendency of the mind to go outwards and instead turn it inwards towards God, in pure thoughts will diminish. Then you will be using the mind properly and giving it some rest as well. This has been described as the yoga of constant inward directed practice. Let us look at this further. How to cross the turbulent river of the worldly life. When you are traveling on a wide powerful river, what is the most important knowledge you should possess? You should know how to swim. That comes first. That takes precedence over all other knowledge. If you go on a great river but do not know how to swim, however educated you may be, you run the risk of getting drowned. There is a story of this. A highly educated scholar had to cross a wide river to attend an important meeting. The wind and the river current were going in opposite directions, so the journey was quite slow that day. Now, Pandits have the habit of constant talking, whether it is to themselves, going on repeating verses from the scriptures, or whether it is to anyone within each earshot. On this particular day, the boatman was quietly concentrating on steering the boat in the river. This Pandit, who was the only passenger traveling in the boat, had no one else to speak to, so he started a conversation with the boatman. Do you know how to read and write? The Pandit asked. The boatman answered, No, I do not know reading and writing. You you seem to be quite a strange person, the Pandit said. In these days, in every village, the government has established schools, and you should know at least a little bit of reading and writing. Just to while away the time, this Pandit continued to speak into the boatman. Next, he asked him, Do you play any musical instruments? The boatman answered, Swami, I have had no chance to learn an instrument. Well, do you know any of the latest popular song? Asked the scholar. No, I do not know that, replied the boatman. What a strange person you are. In every street there is a movie house and there are loudspeakers all around it playing the latest hits, and the radio broadcasts are filled with all the current pop recordings. Should not you at least take a little of your come to buy a cheap transistor radio and listen to music. The boatman confessed, I do not know even what is a transistor is. The Pandit replied, if in this modern age you do not know even about a transistor, you have wasted much of your life. At least a quarter of your life has been dumped into the water. He asked the boatman another question. Do you have a newspaper with you? The boatman replied, I do not have any education at all. What is the use of my having a newspaper, Swami? The Pandit went on, without having an education and without being able to read a newspaper, you have wasted even more of your life. At least half of your life has been dumped into the water. After a few minutes, the Pandit asked again, do you have a watch? Can you tell me what time it is? Swami, the truth is, I do not have even know how to tell time. Then what is the use of my having a watch? The boatman answered. The Pandit rejoined, uh, look at how much of your life has been wasted. If you do not know, if you do not have a radio to enjoy music and you do not read a newspaper and find out what is going on and you do not know what is time it is, then the three-fourths of your life has been dumped into the water. Meanwhile, a strong wind came up and it quickly turned into the powerful gale. The boat started swimming from side to side and the river was soon in full flood. The boatman could no longer maintain control of the boat. He asked the Pandit, Swami, do you know how to swim? The Pandit replied, no, I never learned how to swim. As he was about to go overboard the boatman said to the Pandit, oh Swami, what a pity, what a waste. You don't know how to swim. Now your whole life will be dumped into the water. When you are traveling across a turbulent river, you should know how to swim. Without knowing how to swim, all your other knowledge of philosophy, physics, chemistry, botany, commerce, mathematics, political science, etc., will be of no use to you. In the journey of life, you are traveling on a rushing, unpredictable river, and you should know how to stay afloat and cross that river. To swim safely across the river of life, you must have the knowledge of the Atma and you must develop a strong power of discrimination to know that which is useful and that which is useless for crossing the river. If you have not developed a capacity along these lines, there will be no way for you to find fulfillment in life. You will drown in the river of worldly life. External freedom and inner freedom. As long as you base your life on wealth, property, and worldly things, you will never be able to derive any real joy. There are two things which every person has to attain. One is external freedom, and the other is inner freedom. External freedom speaks of independence, being free of external bonds and limitations. Inner freedom speaks of the liberation from the bondage of the senses, having them under your full control. Every individual should realize both of these freedoms. In the external world, as long as you are under the control of people who are unsympathetic towards you, such as some of foreign kings or ruler, you will not be able to get real joy. In the inner world, as long as you are a slave of the senses, then you will also not be able to enjoy real freedom. Even for the outer freedom, sense control is important, but for becoming master of the inner world, the single most important faculty that you must develop is the control of the senses and thereby gain control over the mind. Once you have control of the mind, you will be able to turn it away from the world and towards God. Then you will get real joy both externally and internally, for then you will see the divine everywhere. Control of the mind and control of the senses is the victory that must be won by all human beings. Up to now, you have been craving for different types of joys and pleasure. You go on uttering prayers for attaining happiness, but you are not making any real efforts to discover where that happiness is to be found. Krishna told Arjuna, you are deluding yourself, believing that you can get happiness and peace in daily life, but you won't be able to get real joy there. Sense objects cannot give you the joy that you are seeking. It is only when you control your senses that you will be able to get peace and joy. Whether you are a believer or a non-believer, you will have to gain control over your senses. Be the master of your senses. Do not allow them to get excited and run after sense object. When the senses get excited and you follow them, you will become weak and forget the Lord. Keep your senses under control and keep your mind firmly fixed on the Lord. Follow His teachings and directions. Without His grace, your strength will leave you and you will not be able to undertake any useful work. You need the Lord's grace to achieve anything worthwhile. As long as Arjuna had the blessings and the company of Krishna, he was a mighty hero and he was able to accomplish many heroic deeds. Once Krishna left his mortal body, Arjuna, through body consciousness and attachment, was overcome with sorrow and self pity. He felt that Krishna had left him, and as a result, he lost all his value. Arjuna, the great hero, now became weak and unable to accomplish even the smallest task. When Arjuna was bringing the surviving women and children from Krishna's household to shelter, robbers attacked him in the forest. Arjuna tried his best to fight against them and to free the women and children from the grip of these murderous robbers, but he could not do it. During the many battles of the Mahabharata war, Arjuna was able to fight and defeat so many great heroes. He was unconquerable no matter the odds against him. But the same Arjuna was not able to even vanquish the robbers in the forest and rescue the women and children who were under his protection. What was the reason for this? Until that time, with Krishna at his side, Arjuna had felt great strength, not recognize where that strength came from. He believed it was his own valor and his own strength, not recognize where that strength came from. He believed it was his own valor and his own strength, and that had provided the victories he was able to gain. But this delusion stemmed from ignorance. Arjuna's strength had not been his, that strength had been given to him by divinity. Even though a person may be endowed with divine strength, he deludes himself into thinking that the strength he has is all due to his own human capability. So it was with Arjuna. But once he lost the strength of divinity, he was not able to accomplish even the smallest thing. Man has been able to undertake many types of activities because the divinity is inherent in him and has been providing all his inner strength, sustenance, and power. Without this divine power, man would not be able to accomplish anything. Without the strength of divinity, not even his smallest undertakings would reach fruition. That stamp is all important. Consider the following example. Let us say that you have made a beautiful envelope out of heavy art paper. You have written Swami's address on it, color full decorative script, and you have enclosed a beautiful letter carefully written with calligraphy and adorned with striking colors. The borders of this envelope are also artfully embellished with many exquisite designs. You have inserted the letter inside the envelope, you have sealed it and posted it. Yet, despite all your great efforts and skill, the letter never reached Swami. Why is that? The reason is that you did not put a stamp on the envelope. All your decorations and all your beautiful handwritings could not help in getting that letter to Swami. Even a letter which has been dropped in the post box at the college hostel will not reach the temple here, l- less than a mile away, without a stamp. But with a stamp on it, a letter could even have traveled thousands of miles and reached its destination. The postal department will not look at all decorations, or ornate letters, the striking colors and design. They will not pay any attention to all your beautiful artwork. They will only look at the address and check to see if the envelope has the correct stamp. So what was most needed was for you to procure a lamp, stamp and properly place it on the envelope. God's grace is earned through purity of the heart. As in the example just given, God will not pay attention to all your elaborate efforts unless you have addressed your efforts correctly and have procured the stamp of divinity and affixed it onto your work. How do you obtain that stamp? Through purity of the heart, by bringing all your efforts in alignment with noble values. God does not care for for all your scholarship, your accomplishment, your wealth and position. Worldly minded people will have their eyes on that, but not God. God only looks in your heart. What is the use of earning many degrees and achieving great scholarships in a particular subject if your heart has not become purified by all your education? It is the values that you practice every day in the area of truth and honesty which will carry you through life and your greatest asset. That is why we emphasize values so strongly in the system of education and we have here at the ashram. Would a hungry man have his hunger satisfied if you just showed him some different types of delicious food? Would a poor man be freed from poverty if merely heard stories of great wealth? Would a sick man be cured if we just described to him the various medicines that could make him well? No, in the same way, if you merely listen to the great teachings of the Gita, you would not be able to derive much benefit from them. You have attended many discourses and you have heard many great truths expounded. Now you must put into practice at the least one or two of these truths, then you will be able to experience real joy. For your efforts to succeed and be truly worthwhile, you need the stamp of divinity. Purity of heart will earn for you that stamp. This means practicing the noble values that the Gita has been teaching. But even before these values can be put into practice, you will have to control your mind and turn it one pointedly in that direction. This can be happen only if you master your senses. Therefore, the crucial lesson in all these teaching is the control of the senses. Krishna told Arjuna, Arjuna, if you want to accomplish anything truly worthwhile in this world, you must gain control over your own sense organs. The same thing was said by Prahlada to his father, the demon king. Father, you have been able to conquer so many worlds, but you have not achieved the real victory. You have not been able to conquer yourself. So I end this video here. Thank you, my dear Sai brothers and sisters. Please like, comment, and share the video and